Chapter 1. "Do you know them?" Madame Maigret asked in an undertone as her husband turned around to look at a couple they had just passed. The man had also turned around and was smiling. He even gave the impression he was about to retrace his steps to shake Maigret's hand. "No, I don't think so. I don't know." The man was short and stout, his wife barely taller than him and podgy. Why did Maigret have the feeling that she was Belgian? Because of her fair complexion, her almost yellow hair, and her bulging blue eyes. This was the 5th time, at least, that their paths had crossed. The first time, the man had stopped dead, and his face had lit up as if in delight. Hesitant, he had half opened his mouth, while Maigret frowned and racked his brains in vain. The man's physique and face looked familiar. But who the devil could he be? Where had he met this cheerful little fellow and his marzipan wife before? Honestly, I can't think. It wasn't important. Besides, the people here were not the same as in normal life. Any moment now the music would strike up. On the bandstand, with its spindly columns and ornate decorations, the uniformed musicians were raising their brass instruments to their lips, their eyes on the conductor. Was it the firemen's band or the municipal workers? They had as many decorations and stripes as South American generals, blood-red shoulder straps and white baldricks. Hundreds of yellow iron chairs were arranged around the bandstand, in ever-widening circles as far as the eye could see, and nearly all of them were occupied by men and women waiting in solemn silence. In a couple of minutes' time, at 9 o'clock, under the spreading trees in the park, the concert would begin. After a muggy day, the evening air was almost chilly, and the breeze made the leaves rustle softly while the light from the rows of lamp-posts with milky globes made pools of a paler green on the dark grass. "Don't you want to sit down?" There were a few free chairs, but they never sat down. They walked at a leisurely pace. Other visitors were strolling around aimlessly like them, half listening to the music, couples, but also many on their own, men and women who were nearly all past middle age. It was a little unreal. The casino was lit up, white and sumptuous, with over-elaborate 1900s-style mouldings. At certain moments, time seemed to have stood still, until a car horn sounded on Rue Georges Clemenceau. "She's here," whispered Madame Maigret, jerking her chin. It had turned into a game. She'd got into the habit of following her husband's gaze, and she could tell when he was surprised or intrigued. What else did they have to do with their days? They ambled around casually. From time to time they paused, not because they were out of breath, but to admire a tree, a house, the play of light and shadow, or a face. They could have sworn they'd been in Vichy for an eternity, whereas this was only their 5th day. They had already created a schedule for themselves which they followed meticulously, as if it were of the utmost importance, and their days were measured out by various rituals which they adhered to religiously. Was Maigret really being serious? His wife sometimes wondered, darting furtive glances at him. He was different from when they were in Paris. His step was more languid, his expression less intense. Most of the time his vague smile expressed satisfaction, certainly, but also a sort of gloomy irony. "She's wearing her white stole." From roaming the park and the banks of the Allier, the boulevards lined with plane trees and the teeming or deserted streets at the same time every day, they had come to recognize a number of faces and figures that were already part of their world. Did not everyone here replicate the same actions at the same time of day, and not only at the springs, where they drank their hallowed beakers of water? Maigret's gaze picked out someone in the crowd and became more focused. That of his wife followed. "Do you think she's a widow?" They could have nicknamed her the Lady in Mauve, or rather the Lady in Lilac, because she always wore something lilac-coloured. That evening, she must have arrived late and had only managed to find a seat at the back. The previous day, she had afforded a sight that was both unexpected and moving. The Maigrets had walked past the bandstand at 8 o'clock in the evening, 1 hour before the concert. The little yellow chairs were arranged in circles so regular that they could have been drawn with a compass. All the chairs were empty, except one in the front row, where the lady in lilac was sitting. She was not reading by the light of the nearest lamp. She was not knitting. She was doing nothing, showing no impatience. Sitting upright, with both hands resting flat on her knees, she remained absolutely still, staring straight ahead, cutting a distinguished figure. She looked as if she had come straight out of a picture book. She wore a white hat, whereas most of the women here were bareheaded. The stole around her shoulders was white too, and her dress the lilac colour of which she seemed fond. Her face was very long and narrow, her lips thin. She must be a spinster, don't you think? Maigret avoided saying anything. He wasn't on a case, wasn't following any leads. Nothing was forcing him to watch people to try and discover their inner truth. He couldn't help doing so now and then, because it had become a reflex. For no reason, he sometimes took an interest in a person out for a stroll, and tried to guess their profession, their family circumstances, and the kind of life they led when they weren't taking the waters. It was difficult. After a few days or a few hours, everyone became part of the little circle. Most eyes had the same slightly vacant serenity, apart from those of the very sick, who were recognizable by their deformities, their gait, but especially from a mixture of anxiety and hope. The lady in lilac was among those who could have been called Maigret's inner circle, the people he'd noticed from the start and who intrigued him. It was hard to fathom her age. She could just as easily have been 45 or 55, and the years had passed her by without leaving any particular scars. One could guess she was used to living in silence, as with nuns, accustomed to solitude. Perhaps she even preferred that solitude. Whether walking or sitting as she was at present, she paid no attention to promenaders or to her neighbours, and she would probably have been most surprised to learn that outside of any professional obligation, Detective Chief Inspector Maigret was trying to gauge her personality. "I don't think she's ever lived with a man," he said, as the music struck up on the bandstand. "Or with children. Perhaps with a very elderly person needing care, an aged mother, for example. In that case, she comes old and be a very good nurse because she lacked gentleness and the gift of communication. If her gaze did not light on people but slid over them without seeing them, it was because it was turned inwards. It was herself, and only herself, that she looked at, and she probably derived a secret satisfaction from doing so. "Shall we walk around the park?" They weren't there to listen to the music. It was simply part of their routine to go past the bandstand at that time, and besides, there wasn't a concert every day. On some evenings, that area of the park was almost deserted. They strolled across it, turned right, and set out down the tree-lined avenue that ran parallel to a street full of neon signs. There were hotels, restaurants, shops, and a cinema. They hadn't been there yet. It wasn't on their itinerary. Some people were following the same route, almost at the same pace. Others were going in the opposite direction. A few took a shortcut to the casino theatre where they'd arrive late, and there were glimpses of the occasional dinner jacket or evening gown. Elsewhere, these folk led different lives, in different neighbourhoods of Paris, in provincial towns or in Brussels, Amsterdam, Rome or Philadelphia. They belonged to particular social circles that had their rules, their taboos, and their passwords. Some were wealthy, others poor. There were invalids whose lives the treatment merely prolonged, and others whom it enabled to spend the rest of the year without having to worry too much about their health. Here, they all mingled. For Maigret, any enemies? "When was the last time you saw her?" 6 or 7 years ago. "I don't know exactly. I remember that it was in winter and there was a storm. She hadn't told me she was coming, and I was surprised to see her walk calmly into my hair salon." "Did you get along with her?" "As sisters do. I didn't know her that well because of the age gap. She left school when I was just starting. Then she took lessons in La Rochelle. That was a long time before I became a manicurist. After that she moved away." "Oh. How old was she then?" "Hold on. I'd been doing my apprenticeship for a year, so I was 16. Add 7. She was 23. "Did you write to her?" "Rarely. Our family's not the sort. Was your mother already dead?" "No. She died 2 years later, and Hélène came to Marseille for the division of the inheritance. There wasn't a lot to divide up. The shop wasn't worth a great deal." "What did your sister do in Paris?" Maigret continued to scrutinize her, while recalling the shape and face of the dead woman. The two siblings had little in common, and Francine did not have her sister's long face or her dark eyes. Hers were blue, and her hair was blonde, perhaps dyed, because she had a curious strand of flaming auburn in the front. At first glance she was a hard-working woman, who doubtless greeted her customers with cheerful, even saucy good humour. She didn't try to appear sophisticated. On the contrary, it was as if she delighted in flaunting her vulgar side. Less than half an hour after viewing her sister's body at the morgue, she sounded almost cheerful as she answered the questions put to her by Lecoeur, on whom it appeared she was working her charm, out of habit. What did she do in Paris? I suppose she was a typist in an office, but I never went to see her there. We were very different, the two of us. At 15 I already had a boyfriend who was a taxi driver, and since then I've had lots of others. I don't think Helene was like that, or if she was, she kept it quiet. What address did you write to her at? I remember, at first, a hotel in Avenue de Clichy, but I've forgotten the name. She changed lodgings quite often. Then she had an apartment in Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette. I don't recall the number. And when you went to Paris as well, didn't you visit her? Oh, yes, I did. It was in Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette, and I was amazed to see her living somewhere so classy. I said so to her. She had a lovely bedroom overlooking the street, a living room, a kitchenette, and a proper bathroom. Was there a man in her life? I wasn't able to find out. I wanted to stay with her for a few days until I found a suitable room, but she said she'd take me to lodgings that were very clean and inexpensive, because she couldn't live with anyone. Not even for 3 or 4 days. That's what I understood. Did that not surprise you? Not particularly. You know, it takes a lot to surprise me. So long as people let me do what I want, they're free too, and I don't ask any questions. How long did you stay in Paris? 11 years. As a manicurist all that time? At first, in local hair salons then, towards the end, in a luxury hotel on the Champs-Élysées. I trained to become a beautician. Did you live alone? Sometimes alone, sometimes not. Did you use to meet up with your sister? Almost never. So you know very little of her life in Paris? All I know is that she worked. When you returned to La Rochelle to set up on your own, did you have a lot of savings? Enough. He didn't ask her how she had earned that money. She wasn't forthcoming on the subject either, but it seemed that they understood each other. You never married? I've already told you, I'm not so stupid. And, turning towards the window through which her companion could be seen, posing at the wheel of his red car, see how sly he looks. But even so, you live with him. He works for me and is an excellent hairdresser to boot. In La Rochelle, we live separately, because I don't want him underfoot day and night. On holiday, it's all right. Are you the owner of the car? Of course. Did he choose it? You guessed. Did your sister ever have any children? Why are you asking me that? I don't know. She was a woman. As far as I know, she didn't. I'd have thought we'd have known, wouldn't we? What about you? I had a baby when I was still living in Paris 15 years ago. At first I wanted to get rid of it, and it would have been better. It was my sister who advised me to keep it. So you saw each other at that time? I went to see her because of that. I needed to talk about it with someone in the family. It might sound funny, but there are times you remember you have a family. In short, I had a son, Philippe. I sent him to be fostered in the Vosges. Why the Vosges? Do you have any connections there? Not at all. Helene found the address in some newspaper. I went to see him a dozen or so times in 2 years. He was fine, being cared for by a very kind farming couple. Their place was clean. Then, one fine day, they told me that the little boy had drowned in the pond. She looked wistful for a moment, then shrugged. After all, maybe it was the best thing for him. You've never met any friends of your sister's, either male or female? She couldn't have had many. Already in Marseilles she thought she was better than the other girls, and they called her the princess. I think it was the same at the shorthand typing school in La Rochelle. Was she proud? She hesitated, thinking, I don't know, that's not the word I'd use. She didn't like people. She didn't like socializing with people. That's it. She preferred her own company. Did she ever attempt suicide? Why? Do you think— Lecoeur smiled. No. You don't commit suicide by strangling yourself. I simply wonder whether, in the past, she was ever tempted to end her life. I'm certain she didn't. She was happy with the way she was. Deep down, she was very self-satisfied. The word struck Maigret, and he pictured the lady in lilac sitting in front of the bandstand. He'd tried then to define the expression on her face, but hadn't found the right word. Francine had just done so. She was perfectly happy with herself. She loved herself so much that in her lounge there were 3 photographs of her, and there were probably more in the dining room and bedroom which they hadn't searched. No one else. No portrait of her mother, her sister, male or female friends. By the sea, she'd had her photograph taken alone beside the waves. For the time being, I assume you are her only heir. We haven't found a will among her papers. It's true that the murderer scattered documents everywhere, but I don't see why he'd have stolen a will. No notary has come forward? When's the funeral? That's up to you. The coroner has finished with the body, which can be handed over to you as soon as you wish. Where do you think I should bury her? I have no idea. I don't know anyone here. In Marcilly, the entire village would come to the funeral, out of curiosity. I wonder whether she'd have liked to go back to Marcilly. Look, if you don't need me any more, I'll go and find a hotel room and have a nice long bath, because I need to— I'll try to think, and tomorrow morning— I'll expect you tomorrow morning, then. As she left, having shaken Lecoeur's hand, she turned to Maigret for a moment, as if wondering what he was doing there, sitting silently in his corner, and then she frowned. Had she recognized him? See you tomorrow. You have been very kind. They saw her get into the car and lean over to her companion to say a few words, and then the car drove off. In the lounge the 2 men exchanged glances, and Lecoeur was the first to blurt out, almost comically, "Well?" To which Maigret replied, puffing on his pipe, "Yes, well?" He didn't feel like talking, and hadn't forgotten he was meeting his wife near the Boulez Players. "See you tomorrow, my friend." "See you tomorrow." As he left, he was honored with a military salute from the officer standing guard, but that didn't make him feel especially proud. This is the end of today's installment of the detective novel. However, the story itself is far from over. The next part will be released soon, or may already be out on our channel. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. And they'd lean towards one another and appear to be exchanging secrets, even though they'd only met a few days earlier. Who knows? Maybe they were real secrets. They talked about their aches and pains, their doctor, their therapy, and then about their married offspring and their grandchildren, whisking photos from their handbags. It was rare to see one sitting alone like the lady in lilac whose name he now knew. It was more usual to see lone men, their faces often haunted by weariness or disease, struggling to make their way through the crowds with dignity. All the same, their features, their eyes, betrayed a sort of anxiety, a vague fear of collapsing in a pool of shade or sunlight amid the legs of the passers-by. Hélène Lange was a loner, and her attitude, her bearing, exuded a sort of pride. She didn't want to be called a spinster, did not accept pity. She held herself upright and walked with a light tread, her chin high. She mixed with no one, had no need to unburden her soul or her mind by confiding in casual acquaintances. Had she chosen to live alone? He wondered, intrigued. He tried to picture her sitting, standing, motionless, moving about. Do they have any leads? Madame Maigret was beginning to be jealous of his reverie. In Paris, she would not have dared ask her husband any questions midway through an investigation. But here, walking side by side for hours, had they not got into the habit of thinking aloud? It was never a real conversation, an exchange of precise rejoinders, but nearly always a few words or a comment that was enough to indicate the other person's train of thought. Number there waiting for the sister. She doesn't have any other family. Apparently not. It's time for your second glass. They went inside the fountain hall where the attendants' heads were visible above the sunken bar behind which they worked. Hélène Lange used to come and drink here every day. Was it on doctor's orders, or simply to give herself a purpose for her walk? What are you thinking about? I'm asking myself, why Vichy? She'd moved to this town around 10 years ago and bought a house. So she was 37 at the time and did not appear to need to earn a living because, in the first 2 years, she hadn't rented out the first-floor bedrooms. And why not? Retorted Madame Maigret. There are hundreds of small and medium-sized towns in France where she could have moved to, not to mention La Rochelle, which she knew from her childhood and adolescence. Her sister, after living in Paris, went back to La Rochelle and settled down there. Maybe the two sisters didn't get along. It wasn't so straightforward. Maigret was still watching the people walking, and their pace reminded him of a similar permanent procession elsewhere in the warm sunshine. In Nice, on the Promenade des Anglais. Because before coming to Vichy, Hélène Lange had lived in Nice for 5 years. She lived in Nice for 5 years, he said aloud. A lot of people with small private incomes. Quite. People with small private incomes, but also people from every walk of life, just like here. I was wondering the day before yesterday what the crowd strolling in this park and sitting on the chairs reminded me of. It's the same as on the seafront in Nice. Crowds from so many different backgrounds that they become neutral. Here, too, there must be former stage and screen celebrities. We discovered a neighborhood of opulent mansions, where you can still glimpse men-servants in striped waistcoats. In the hills you can make out luxurious, secluded villas, like in Nice. What do you infer from that? Nothing. She was 32 when she moved to Nice, and she was as alone there as she was here. In general, solitude sets in later. There is such a thing as heartache. I know, but it doesn't cause a face like that. There are also broken relationships. 95% of women remarry. What about men? He gave her a broad smile and said, without her realizing that he was joking, 100%. In Nice, there was a floating population, branches of Paris shops and several casinos. In Vichy, tens of thousands of people came to take the waters, changing every 3 weeks, and there were the same shops, 3 casinos and a dozen cinemas. Anywhere else, she would have been known. People would have gossiped about her and spied on her. Not in Nice, not in Vichy. So did she have something to hide? Do you have to meet up with Lecoeur? He invited me to drop by and see him when I want. He still calls me chief, like when he was in my department. They all do. It's true, out of habit. You don't think it's more out of affection? He shrugged, and they soon found themselves making their way back to their hotel. This time they went through the old town, pausing in front of the poignant displays in the windows of the antiques shops. They knew that, at mealtimes, the other guests watched them, but they had to get used to it. Maigret tried to follow Dr. Rian's recommendations. Chew every mouthful carefully before swallowing, even mashed potatoes. Don't pick up more food on your fork before you've swallowed the previous mouthful. Don't drink more than 1 or 2 sips of water, possibly tinted with a dash of wine. He preferred no wine at all. He indulged in a few puffs on his pipe before going upstairs and lying down fully dressed for his nap. Enough light filtered through the shutters for his wife, in the armchair, to take her turn at skimming the newspaper, and, through his drowsiness, he could hear a rustle as she turned the page. He had been lying down for barely 20 minutes when there was a knock on the door. Madame Maigret scuttled out onto the landing and closed the door behind her. There was whispering. Then she went downstairs and was only out of the room for a few minutes. That was Lecoeur. Has there been a development? The sisters just arrived in Vichy. She went to the police station and they're going to drive her to the morgue to identify the body. Lecoeur's waiting for her at Rue de Bourbonnais. He wondered whether you'd like to go over there and be present when he questions her. Maigret was already on his feet, grumbling, and he began by opening the shutters to bring light and life back into the room. Shall I meet you at the spring? The spring, The first glass of water, the iron chair, weren't until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. "It won't take that long. Wait for me on one of the benches near the boules players instead." He wasn't sure whether to take his straw hat. "Are you afraid they'll laugh at you?" Too bad. He was on holiday after all, and he placed it proudly on his head. Curious bystanders continued to stop in front of the house, still under police guard. Once they realized that there was nothing to see except closed windows, they soon moved off, shaking their heads. "Have a seat, Chief. If you place the chair in the corner, near the window, you'll see her in the full light. Haven't you met her yet?" "I was having lunch, in an excellent restaurant, incidentally, when I was informed that she was at the police station. She's being taken to the morgue and then brought to me." Through the net curtains they spotted a black vehicle, driven by a uniformed police officer, followed by a long, red, open-topped car. The couple in the front, hair disheveled, faces tanned, looked very much as if they were returning home from a holiday. The woman and the man exchanged a few words, then leaned towards each other, and, after a quick kiss, the woman got out and slammed the door, while her companion remained at the wheel and lit a cigarette. He was swarthy, with clearly defined features, and muscles rippling beneath his yellow polo shirt. He looked in the direction of the house without curiosity, as the police officer showed the young woman into the lounge. "Detective Chief Inspector Lecoeur. You are Francine Lang, I assume?" "That's correct." She glanced vaguely over at Maigret, who was not introduced to her and sat with his back to the light. "Madame or mademoiselle?" "I'm not married, if that's what you mean. My friend, who's in the car, is with me, but I know men too well to marry one. Afterwards they're a nightmare to get rid of." She was an attractive woman who didn't look her 40 years, as she paraded her provocative figure around the small conventional lounge. She wore a flame-colored dress, so light that it was see-through, and you could have sworn she gave off a whiff of the sea. "The telegram reached me last night. Lucienne managed to get us seats on the first flight to Paris. At Orly we picked up our car, which we'd left there when we flew out." "I presume that the victim is indeed your sister?" She nodded, without emotion. "Wouldn't you like to sit down?" "Thank you. May I smoke?" She watched the smoke rising from Maigret's pipe as if to say, "If he can sit there puffing away, then I should be allowed a cigarette." "Please do. I imagine this murder is as much of a shock to you as it is to us. It's the last thing I'd have expected. Do you know if your sister had any enemies?" "Why would Hélène, a widow who lives in Rue Lamarck in Paris? She's an imposing person in her early 60s who comes to Vichy every year to shed a few kilos. It's the first time she's rented a room from Mademoiselle Lange. In previous years she stayed at a hotel. People say she used to lead a different lifestyle, that her husband was a wealthy man, but was too generous, which has left her in difficult circumstances. In short, she's dripping with fake jewelry and talks like a character in a bad play. She went out at 9 p.m. She saw no one and left the house in total darkness." "Does each lodger have their own key?" "Yes." "The Virevaux widow went to the Carlton Bridge Club, which she left just before midnight. She walked back as usual. She doesn't have a car. The Moleskis have a little motor car but rarely use it during their stay in Vichy, and most of the time it's kept in a local garage." "Were the lights still on?" "Hold on, Chief. Of course I wasn't able to question the Virevaux woman until after the murder had been discovered and the whole street was in turmoil. I don't know if her imagination is as colourful as her taste in costume jewellery. She claims that on reaching the corner of the street, in other words the intersection of Boulevard de la Salle and Rue de Bourbonnais, she almost bumped into a man. He hadn't been able to see her coming, and she swears he was startled and raised his hand to his face as if to avoid being recognized. But she recognized him anyway. Number. She states that she'd be able to identify him all the same if she were to meet him face to face. He was very tall and very strong. A broad gorilla's chest, she says. He was walking fast, leaning forwards. She was frightened, but she still turned around to look at him as he hurried on his way into town. A man of what age? Not young, not old either, very strong. Terrifying. She almost ran and only felt safe once the key was in the lock. Were lights still visible on the ground floor? That's the point. They were off, insofar as we can trust her testimony. She didn't hear anything. She went to bed, so upset that she took a spoonful of peppermint spirit on a sugar lump. Who discovered the murder? I'll get to that, Chief. Mademoiselle Lange wanted to rent out her rooms to respectable people, but she wasn't prepared to provide meals. Nor did she allow them to cook, or even permit them to use a little spirit stove to make coffee in the morning. At around 8 o'clock yesterday morning, Madame Molesky came downstairs with her thermos to fill it with coffee at a nearby café and buy croissants, as she did every day. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, nor when she returned. What surprised her was not hearing any noise, especially the second time, because Mademoiselle Lange usually rose early and could be heard moving from one room to the next. "I wonder whether she's ill," she said to her husband while they ate, "because the landlady was always complaining about her health. At 9 o'clock the couple went downstairs, whereas Madame Virevaux was still in her room, and in the hallway they found Charlotte dumbstruck." Charlotte? "A little servant girl whom Mademoiselle Lange employed every morning from 9 to 12 to clean the rooms. She cycles over from a village around 10 kilometers away, and she's a bit simple." "All the doors are locked," she said to the Moleskys. On the other mornings, by the time she arrived, the ground-floor doors and windows were open because Mademoiselle Lange always said she needed some fresh air. "Don't you have the key?" "No. If she's not there, I may as well go home." Molesky tried to open the door with the key to his room but wasn't able to, and in the end he called the police, from the same bar where his wife had just gone to get the coffee. That's about all. The Vichy police lieutenant soon arrived with a locksmith. The key to the lounge door was missing. The other doors, that of the kitchen and the bedroom, were locked. In this lounge, here to be precise on the edge of the rug, Hélène Lange was lying, or rather she was curled up, and she wasn't a pretty sight because she'd been strangled. She was still wearing her mauve dress, but she'd taken off her stolen hat, which we found on the coat stand in the hall. The various drawers were open and papers and cardboard boxes were scattered over the floor. No rape. Not even attempted. Nothing stolen either, as far as we can tell. The report in this morning's La Tribune is quite accurate. In a drawer we found 5 100-franc notes. The victim's handbag had been searched, its contents strewn on the floor like the rest, including 400 francs in 10 and 20-franc notes, as well as some small change, and a season ticket for the Grand Casino Theatre. How long ago did she buy this house? 9 years. She moved here from Nice, where she lived for a while. Did she work there? No. She lived in a modest apartment near Boulevard Albert Premier and seemed to be a woman of independent means. Did she travel? 2 or 3 day trips, practically every month. Does anyone know where she went? She was secretive about her comings and goings. What about here? The first 2 years, she didn't take in lodgers. Then she rented out 3 rooms during the season, but all 3 weren't always occupied. That's the case at present. The blue room is empty, because there's the white room, the pink room, and the blue room. Maigret noticed something else. He could not see a single touch of green, not an ornament, not a cushion or decoration. Was she superstitious? How do you know? One day she lost her temper because Madame Molesky had bought a bunch of carnations, and she told her that she didn't want those unlucky flowers in the house. Again she told Madame Virevaux that she was unwise to wear a green dress, and that it would undoubtedly cost her dear. Did she have any visitors? Never, according to the neighbours. Post. From time to time, a letter from La Rochelle. The postman has been questioned. Flyers. Bills from some shops in Vichy. Did she have a bank account? At the Crédit Lyonnais on the corner of Rue Georges Clemenceau. You've been there, of course. She paid in regular amounts around 5,000 francs every month, not always on the same date. In cash? Yes. During the season, she deposited more, because of the rent from her lodgers. Did she ever write cheques? To shops, nearly all in Vichy or Moulins, where she would go occasionally. Sometimes she paid by cheque for items she bought from Paris by mail order. You'll find a pile of catalogues in this corner. Occur watched Maigret, whose cream jacket made him look very different from the man he knew from Quai des Orfèvres. What do you reckon, Chief? That I have to go? My wife's waiting for me. And your first glass of water. The Vichy police know that too, he grumbled. Will you come back? The police judiciaire doesn't have an office in Vichy. Every night I drive back to Clermont-Ferrand, which is only 60 kilometers away. The police chief here has offered to put a room and a telephone at my disposal, but I prefer to work at the scene. My men are trying to find passers-by or neighbors who might have seen Mademoiselle Lange on Monday evening when she returned home, because we don't know whether there was someone with her or whether she met someone in the street or whether— I'm sorry, my friend. My wife. Of course, Chief. Maigret was torn between his curiosity and his routine. He was a little annoyed with himself for having turned right instead of left on leaving the Hôtel de la Bérésina. He'd have paused as he did every morning at the children's playground. Then, further on, he'd have watched the Boules players. Had Madame Maigret gone on their daily promenade alone, stopping at each of their usual places? Wouldn't you like a lift? My car's outside, and young Dicelle would be only too happy to— No, thank you. I'm here to walk. And he walked, alone, striding quickly to make up for lost time. He had drunk his first glass of water and found his usual spot, between the vast glazed fountain hall and the first tree. He could sense that, although his wife didn't ask him any questions, she was alert to his every gesture and facial expression. His newspaper on his knee, he gazed up at the sky through the barely trembling foliage. It was the same clear blue as always, with one small, drifting, dazzling white cloud. In Paris, he sometimes complained that he missed certain sensations for which he was nostalgic. A breath of air, warmed by the sunshine on his cheek, the play of light among the leaves or on the gravel crunching beneath the feet of the crowd, and even the taste of dust. Here, a miracle happened. As he mulled over his conversation with Lecoeur, he felt as if he was immersed in the atmosphere, and nothing that was going on around him escaped him. Was he really thinking? Was he daydreaming? Families strolled past, as everywhere, but there were many more older couples. Were there more lone men or lone women? The women, especially the elderly ones, tended to gather in groups. You could see them arranging the chairs in circles of 6 or 8, right again, then again, and they spotted a dozen or so onlookers on a pavement gazing upwards. A little glint came into Madame Maigret's eyes. Maigret appeared to hesitate. He crossed to the other side of the street, stopped to empty his pipe, banging it against his heel, and slowly filled another. It made him look like a big child, and at times like these she felt a rush of affection. A struggle was taking place inside Maigret. Finally, as if he didn't know where he was, he mingled with the group of curious spectators, and he too stared up at the house opposite, outside which a car was parked, and nearby a police officer was standing guard. The house was elegant, like most of the others in the street. The facade had been repainted white tinged with pink quite recently, and the shutters and balcony were almond green. On a marble plaque was the name, in fancy English lettering, Les Iris. Madame Maigret guessed at the conflict going on inside him. He hadn't wanted to go to the police headquarters, just as right now he hadn't wanted to cross the street and tell the police officer who he was and gain admission to the house. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The street was clean, the air clear, light, joyful. A few houses further down, a woman was beating her carpets at the window, watching the spectators with a pitying look. But the previous day, when the murder had been discovered, and the police had arrived in large numbers, hadn't she herself mingled with the neighbors to stare at a facade which she'd been familiar with for years? Some exchanged opinions. Apparently it was a crime of passion. Don't be ridiculous, she was nearly 50. On the first floor, a face with dark hair and a pointed nose could be made out behind the windows, and sometimes in the background the shape of a man who was still young. The door was white, a milk float went past, and bottles were deposited on most doorsteps. The milkman walked towards the white door holding a bottle of milk. The police officer said something to him, probably that there was no point, but the milkman shrugged and left the bottle anyway. Was anyone going to notice that Maigret? He couldn't stay there indefinitely. Just when he was about to set off again, a tall young man with a mop of hair appeared in the doorway, crossed the street and walked straight up to him. "The chief superintendent would like you to come and see him." His wife managed to suppress a smile. "Where should I wait for you?" she asked. "In our usual spot at the spring." Had he been recognized through the window? He crossed the road in a dignified manner, trying to put on a grumpy expression. The hallway was cool, and on the right was a bamboo coat rack where 2 hats hung. He added his, a straw boater which his wife had made him buy at the same time as the mohair jacket he was a little ashamed of. "Come in, Chief." A familiar, jovial voice, a face and a shape that Maigret recognized at once. Lecoeur. They hadn't seen each other for 15 years, when Désiré Lecoeur, an inspector at the time, had still been part of Maigret's team at Quai des Orfèvres. "Yes, Chief. We gain experience, a paunch and stripes. Here I am, Chief Superintendent in Clermont-Ferrand, which is why I'm landed with this exasperating case. Come in." He showed him into a small sitting room, blue with smoke, and sat down at the table serving as a temporary desk which was strewn with papers. Maigret lowered himself gingerly onto a delicate Louis XV chair, and there must have been a questioning look in his eyes, because Lecoeur hastily said, "You're probably wondering how I knew you were here. First of all, Moinet, whom you haven't met and who is head of the Vichy police, saw your name among the hotel index cards. Naturally, he didn't dare disturb you, but his men see you walk past every day. Apparently, even the Coast Guards are wondering when you'll decide to play boules. Each morning you seem to be more and more interested in the game, to the point. Did you get here yesterday?" "From Clermont-Ferrand, of course, with 2 of my men, including young Dissel, who brought you in from the street. I was loath to send him to fetch you. I said to myself that you're here to take the waters, not to give us a hand. I also knew that if you were intrigued by the case, you'd end up—" Now Maigret really looked grumpy. "A financially motivated murder?" he growled. "Definitely not." "A crime of passion?" "Unlikely. I say that, but after 24 hours I'm barely any the wiser than when I arrived yesterday morning." He rummaged among his papers. "The victim's name is Hélène Lange. She was 48 and was born in Marcilly, about 10 kilometers from La Rochelle. I telephoned Marcilly Town Hall and found out that for many years her mother, widowed young, ran a small haberdashery on Place de l'Église. She had 2 daughters, and Hélène, the eldest, took a shorthand typing course in La Rochelle. Then for a time she worked in the offices of a ship owner, before leaving for Paris, after which there's no trace of her. She never applied for a copy of her birth certificate, which suggests she never married. Besides, her identity card states single. She had a sister 6 or 7 years her junior who was a manicurist in La Rochelle. Like her elder sibling, she went to Paris, but she returned after 10 or so years. She must have built up a tidy sum which allowed her to buy a hair salon on Place d'Armes, which she still runs. I tried to telephone her, but I only spoke to an assistant who's looking after the salon while she's on holiday in the Balearic Islands. I sent a cable to her hotel to ask her to fly home immediately, and I'm expecting her later today. This sister Francine isn't married either. The mother died 8 years ago. We're not aware of any other family." Maigret, despite himself, had his professional countenance. Anyone would have thought that he was in charge of the investigation, and that one of his colleagues was giving him a report in his office. He missed having his pipes in front of him, which he was in the habit of fiddling with in such circumstances, the view over the Seine through the window, his sturdy armchair with a back he could lean against. While Lecoeur was speaking, he noticed 2 or 3 details, in particular that in this lounge that served as a living room there were photographs only of Hélène Lange. On a sideboard were pictures of her aged 5 or 6, in a dress that was too long for her, a thin braid either side of her face. On the wall, a larger portrait by a skilled photographer showed her aged around 20, in a romantic pose, her gaze ethereal. In a third, she was standing at the edge of the sea. She was wearing not a bathing costume but a white dress, fluttering towards the left in the breeze, like a flag, and she was holding a light-coloured, broad-brimmed hat in both hands. Do you know when and how the murder was committed? It's hard to piece together the events. We've been working on it since yesterday morning, but we've barely made any progress. The day before yesterday, that is Monday evening, Hélène Lange had dinner alone in her kitchen. She washed the dishes because we didn't find any dirty crockery, got dressed up and went out after switching off all the lights. If you want to know, she ate 2 soft-boiled eggs. She was wearing a mauve dress and a white woolen stole, as well as a hat that was also white. Maigret hesitated, but finally couldn't resist the urge to announce, "I know. Have you already investigated?" "No, but on Monday evening I glimpsed her sitting in front of the bandstand where there was a concert playing." "You don't know when she left the park?" "My wife and I moved on from there before 9:30 on our usual stroll." "Was she on her own?" "She was always on her own." Le Coeur didn't try to hide his astonishment. "Had you noticed her on other occasions?" A smiling Maigret nodded. "Why?" "Here, we spend our time walking, and automatically people look at one another. They also meet at the same times in the same places." "Do you have an idea?" "About what?" "About the kind of woman she was." "She certainly wasn't ordinary, that's all I know." "Right. I'll go on. 2 of the 3 first-floor bedrooms are rented out. The first is occupied by an engineer from Grenoble, a certain Molesky, and his wife. They left the house a few minutes after Mademoiselle Lange to go to the cinema, and they only got back at 11:30. All the shutters were closed, as usual, but light could be seen between the slats of those on the ground floor. Once in the hallway, they noticed that there was light coming from under the door of the lounge, and from Mademoiselle Lange's bedroom, which is on the right. Did they not hear anything? Molesky didn't hear anything. His wife, although very uncertain, spoke of a murmur of voices. They went to bed almost immediately, and nothing woke them until the next morning. The other lodger is called Madame Virevaux, fascinated by the 2 he nicknamed the merry couple. The plump man who always looked as if he was about to come over and shake his hand, and his little wife, who resembled a piece of candy. What could their occupation be? Had they recognized Maigret from seeing his photo in the newspapers? In actual fact, not many people here recognized him, a lot fewer than in Paris. Admittedly, his wife had made him buy a light, almost white mohair jacket, like the ones worn by men of a certain age in the summer when he was a child. Even without the jacket, people would probably not have thought it was him. He was certain that those who frowned on glancing at him, or who turned around, said to themselves, "Fancy that! He looks just like Maigret." But they didn't think he was Maigret. And in truth, he was so little like himself. The other intriguing character, the lady in lilac. She was taking the waters too, only at the Grande Grille, where they saw her every morning. She had her spot, slightly apart from everyone else, close to the newspaper kiosk. Always dignified and aloof, she only took 1 sip of water at a time. Then, after rinsing and wiping her glass, she carefully put it back in its straw case. 3 or 4 people greeted her. The Maigrets didn't see her in the afternoons. Did she go to the baths? Had her doctor ordered her to rest? Sedimentation rate perfect, Dr. Rian had declared. Hourly average 6 millimeters. Cholesterol a little high, but within the acceptable range. Urea normal. Serum iron level fairly low, but nothing to worry about. Nor about the uric acid. You're not allowed to eat game, offal, or shellfish. As for your blood count, it is excellent, with a hemoglobin level of 98. All you need is a thorough cleansing of your system. Do you not feel sluggish, or get headaches? So we're going to continue with the same regimen for the next few days. Come and see me on Saturday. That evening, which was a bandstand concert evening, they didn't see the lady in lilac leave because they never stayed to the end of the concert, but returned early to the France neighborhood with its empty streets, freshly painted facades, and the Hôtel de la Bérésina, whose double entrance door was flanked by 2 shrubs in containers. They slept in a brass bed, and all the furniture was from the turn of the century, like the clawfoot bathtub and the swan-neck taps. The hotel was well run and quiet, except when the Gagnier's son, who was on the first floor, played cowboys and Indians on his own in the garden. Everyone was asleep. Day 5? Day 6? It was Madame Maigret who was the most disoriented at not having to make coffee in the mornings. At 7 o'clock, they were served breakfast on a tray, with fresh croissants and the Clermont-Ferrand newspaper, which devoted 2 pages to Vichy life. Maigret had got into the habit of reading it from the first line to the last, so as to be informed of every single little local event. He even read the death notices and the classified ads. 3-bed house, bathroom, all mod cons, excellent condition, uninterrupted view over. Do you intend to buy a house? No, but it's interesting. I wonder whether it's people who regularly take the waters keen to have their own house to spend 1 month a year in, or whether it's retired folk from Paris or elsewhere who— They got dressed in turn, and the owner never failed to greet them at the foot of the red-carpeted staircase with its brass rods. The owner wasn't from the area, but from Montélimar, which could be detected from his sing-song accent. They frittered away the hours, the children's playground, the boulets players. By the way, I saw that there's a big market every Wednesday and Saturday. We could go and have a look. He'd always loved markets, the smell of the fruit and vegetables, the sight of quarters of beef, fish, lobsters still alive. After all, Ryan did tell me to walk 5 kilometers every day. His tone was ironic. He has no idea that we chalk up an average of 15. Do you think? Work it out. We walk for at least 5 hours. We might not walk at an athlete's pace, but we still do between 3 and 4 kilometers an hour. I'd never have believed it. A glass of water, the yellow chair, and reading the Paris newspapers which had just arrived. Lunch in the all-white dining room where, on some tables, there was an opened bottle of wine labelled with the guest's name. There wasn't one on the Maigret's table. Did he say you can't drink wine? Not in so many words, but I may as well not. She couldn't get over seeing him become a conscientious spa patient and managing to remain good-humoured. He allowed himself a brief nap, then they resumed their routine, on the other side of the town this time, with the parade of shops and the crowds on the pavements that kept forcing them apart. Have you noticed how many pedicurists and orthopedists there are? If everyone walks as much as we do— There was no bandstand concert that evening, but there was one in the gardens of the Grand Casino. The brass band was replaced by string instruments, and the music was more solemn, like the faces of the audience. They didn't spot the lady in lilac, nor did they come across her walking in the park, but they did run into the merry couple, who were more dressed up than usual, and hurrying in the direction of the casino theatre where a comedy was being performed. The brass bed. Time flew by, surprisingly fast, even though they were doing nothing. The croissants, coffee, the sugar lumps wrapped in wax paper, the Clermont-Ferrand newspaper. Maigret, in his armchair by the window, smoked his first pipe in his pyjamas, with some coffee still left in his cup, which he eked out as long as possible. When he let out an exclamation, Madame Maigret appeared from the bathroom in a blue floral dressing gown, toothbrush in hand. What is it? Look! On the first page, devoted to Vichy, was a photograph, that of the lady in lilac. She must have been a few years younger, and she'd made the effort to give a wan smile for the photographer. What's happened to her? She's been murdered. Last night? If it happened last night, it wouldn't be in today's papers. The night before. We saw her at the bandstand. At around 9 o'clock, yes. She went home, 2 streets from here, Rue de Bourbonnais. I had no idea we were almost neighbours. She took off her stole and her hat, and went into the sitting room on the left of the hallway. How was she killed? She was strangled. Yesterday morning her lodgers were surprised not to hear any noise coming from the ground floor. She's not here to take the waters. She lives in Vichy all year round. She owns the house and rents out furnished rooms on the first floor. Maigret remained seated, and his wife knew what an effort that was for him. Do you think it's a financially motivated murder? The killer searched the place thoroughly, but doesn't appear to have taken anything. A few pieces of jewellery and a sum of money were even found in a drawer that had been opened. She wasn't raped. No. He gazed at the window in silence. Do you know who's in charge of the investigation? Of course not. Lecoeur, who was one of my inspectors and is now head of the Clermont-Ferrand Police Judiciaire, he's here. He doesn't have any idea that I am too. Do you plan to go and see him? Maigret didn't answer straight away. Chapter 2 It was 9:05, and Maigret still hadn't answered his wife's question. It was as if it was a matter of honor for him to behave exactly as on the other mornings and keep to their Vichy routine without departing from it in the least. He had read the newspaper to the end as he finished his coffee, then shaved, listening to the news on the radio as usual. At 9:05 he was ready, and the two of them descended the red-carpeted staircase with brass rods. The owner, in a white jacket, a chef's hat on his head, was waiting for him in the hallway. "Well, Monsieur Maigret, we're taking good care of you here in Vichy, even going so far as to offer you a juicy murder." Maigret managed a vague smile. "You'll be handling it, I hope. What happens outside Paris isn't under my authority." Madame Maigret was watching him. She thought he wouldn't notice, but he was aware of it. Instead of going down Rue d'Auvergne, towards the river and the children's playground, he turned right, looking all innocent. True, they sometimes varied their itinerary, but always on the way back from town. She was in awe of her husband's sense of direction. He hadn't consulted any maps. He gave the impression of wandering aimlessly, diving down little back streets that seemed to be taking him away from his destination, and she'd be taken by surprise when she suddenly recognized the facade of their hotel, the two shrubs in their green containers. This time he turned, "Yes, no, more. With meals I usually have just 2 or 3 glasses. At the office sometimes a beer, which I have sent up from a nearby brasserie. Aperitif? Quite often, with one or another of my colleagues. At the Brasserie Dauphine." It wasn't to get drunk, but for the atmosphere, the familiar crush, the smell of cooking, aniseed and calvados that had impregnated the walls. Why was he ashamed of it all of a sudden, in front of this young man who was so spruce and so comfortably housed? In short, no real excesses. He wanted to be honest. It depends what you call excesses. In the evenings I don't say no to a glass or 2 of sloe brandy, which my sister-in-law sends us from Alsace. My investigations often require me to spend a certain amount of time in cafes or bars. It's hard to explain. If I start one of these investigations on Vouvray, for example, because I find myself in a bar specializing in it, I tend to continue on Vouvray. How many a day? This reminded him of his childhood, the village confessional redolent of mouldy old wood, and the priest who snorted snuff. A lot? You'd probably say it was a lot. Does it go on for long? Sometimes 3 days, sometimes 8 or 10, if not more. It depends on luck. The doctor didn't reprimand him. He wasn't given a rosary to recite, but he could guess what the fair-haired doctor, sitting in the sunlight behind a fine mahogany desk, thought of him. No severe indigestion, no heartburn, dizziness? Dizziness? Yes. Nothing serious. Occasionally, especially over the past few weeks, he felt as if he were in a less solid world that was slightly unreal. He himself was floating, his legs wobbly. It wasn't bad enough to seriously worry him, but it was unpleasant. Luckily, this sensation only lasted a few minutes. Once it had happened when he was about to cross Boulevard du Palais, and he'd waited before venturing into the road. I see. What did he see? That he was ill? That he smoked and drank too much? That it was time, at his age, to go on a diet? Maigret wasn't dismayed. He smiled with the smile his wife had seen on his face since they'd been in Vichy. He appeared to be laughing at himself, but even so he was a little dispirited. "Let us go next door." The whole works this time. The doctor even made him climb up and down the rungs of a stepladder for 3 minutes, blood pressure lying down, sitting and standing. Then the screen. Breathe. Deeper. Hold your breath. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. It was funny and upsetting, dramatic and crazy. He had another 30 years to live, perhaps, but it was equally possible that in a few minutes he'd be told tactfully that his life as a man in good health as a normal man was over, and that from now on he would be an invalid. They had all been through the same thing, all the people they met in the park, around the springs, under the luxuriant trees, by the lake, and even those who sunbathed on the beach. The boules players, the tennis players glimpsed on the other side of the Allier in the shade of the sporting club. "Mademoiselle Jeanne." "Yes, monsieur." The nurse knew what she had to bring. It was all part of a routine like the one the Maigrets were going to adopt. First of all, the little device to prick his fingertip and collect drops of blood that would be divided among several test tubes. "Relax. Clench your fist." A needle pricked the vein in his arm. "Unclench." This wasn't the first time he'd had his blood taken, but it felt as if this time the test had taken on a sort of solemnity. "Thank you. You can put your clothes back on now." They met up again in the office, whose walls were lined with books and medical journals bound year by year. "I don't think heavy medication is required in your case. I'll see you the day after tomorrow at the same time, when I'll have the results of your tests. In the meantime, I've devised a regimen for you. You're staying at a hotel, I assume. Just give this sheet to the hotel manager. He'll know what to do." A printed card with 2 columns. In one, dishes that were allowed, and in the other, dishes that were prohibited. There were even sample menus on the back. "I don't know whether you're aware of the therapeutic benefits of the various springs. There used to be a little book on the subject, written by 2 of my colleagues, but I think it's out of print. We're going to try, first of all, to alternate the waters of 2 springs, Chaumel and Grande Grille, both of which you'll find in the park." The 2 men were solemn. Maigret didn't feel like shrugging or laughing while the doctor scribbled on a notepad. "Are you in the habit of rising early and having breakfast? I see. Is your wife here with you? In that case, I shan't send you across town on an empty stomach. Let's see. Start in the morning, at around 10:30, at the Grande Grille. You'll find chairs to sit on, and, if it's raining, a big glazed hall. Drink a glass of water every half hour, 3 times, as hot as you can manage. In the afternoon, at around 5, do the same thing at the Chaumel Spring. Don't be surprised if the next day you feel a bit lethargic. It's a temporary effect of the treatment. Besides, I'll see you again then." All that was already ages ago. Then he was just a novice confusing one spring with another. Now he was settled into the treatment routine, like the thousands, the tens of thousands of men and women he rubbed shoulders with from morning to evening. Sometimes all the little yellow chairs in the park were taken, like in the evening, around the bandstand, each person waiting until it was time to go and drink their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th dose. Like the others, he'd bought a measuring glass, and Madame Maigret had insisted on having her own. "But you're not taking the waters." "Why not? What harm can it do? I read in the brochures that the waters make you lose weight." The glasses were kept in woven straw cases, and Madame Maigret wore both of them over her shoulder, the way racegoers wear their binoculars. The 2 of them had never been for so many walks. They were outdoors from 9 o'clock in the morning, and apart from delivery men, they were almost the only people in the quiet streets of the neighborhood they were staying in, the France district, close to the Célestin Spring. A few minutes from their hotel, there was a children's playground, with a paddling pool, swings, games of all kinds, and even a puppet theatre that was bigger than the one on the Champs-Élysées. "Do you have your ticket, monsieur?" They had paid 1 franc each and strolled beneath the trees, watching the almost naked kids frolicking, and had come back the next day. "If you buy a book of 20 tickets, it'll be cheaper." He didn't dare. It was too premeditated. They had walked past by chance. It was only out of habit, out of idleness, that they came back each day at the same time. After that, they also stopped at the area reserved for the boules players, and Maigret solemnly watched 2 or 3 games, seeing under the same tree the tall, thin man who only had 1 arm, but was the best thrower. In another foursome, where the accent of the South could be heard, an elegantly dressed man with a rosy complexion and very white hair played with dignity, and the others called him Senator. A little further on, the beach began, with the Coast Guard's hut and the buoys marking out the bathing area, and there too sat the same people under the same beach umbrellas. "Aren't you bored?" his wife had asked him on the 2nd day. "Why?" he asked in surprise. Because he wasn't bored. He was gradually adapting to a new pace, different habits. He noticed with amazement that he automatically filled his pipe on arriving at the Bellerive Bridge, and he filled another at the yacht club, where from the shore they watched the young boys and girls water skiing. Don't you think it's a dangerous sport? Why? And finally the park, the glasses of water which a member of staff filled for them from the spring, and which they sipped slowly. The water was hot and salty. At the Chomel spring, the water tasted strongly of sulphur, and Maigret hastily lit a fresh pipe. Madame Maigret was astounded to find him so docile, so calm, and sometimes it even worried her. That was when she found out that in a way he was playing the detective. He studied people as if he couldn't help it, noted the slightest details, and classified them by category. For example, at their hotel, the Hôtel de la Bérésina, a sort of family guest house, he had already identified from their diet those with liver problems and the diabetics. He tried to guess each person's story, to imagine them in their everyday life, and sometimes he got his wife to join in this pastime. It had all begun uneventfully, one evening when they were having dinner at the Pardons. Madame Pardon had cooked pressed duck, one of her specialities, which Maigret loved. "Isn't it any good?" she'd asked anxiously, seeing Maigret eat only a few mouthfuls. Whereas Pardon suddenly looked at his guest with concern. "Are you in pain?" "Not really. It's nothing." Even so, the doctor noticed that his friend's face was pale and that there were beads of sweat on his forehead. He said no more during the meal. Maigret had barely taken a sip from his glass. When offered a vintage Armagnac with the coffee, he raised his hand. "Not tonight. I'm sorry." "Only later," Pardon said quietly. "Shall we go into my consulting room for a moment?" Maigret followed him reluctantly. For some time he had foreseen that this would happen one day, but he kept postponing that day. The doctor's consulting room was neither big nor luxurious. On the desk, a stethoscope lay next to vials, tubes of ointment and paperwork, and the bed where patients were examined seemed to have retained the deep imprint of the last one. "What's wrong, Maigret?" "I don't know. Age, probably." 52. 53. "I've had a lot of work recently, worries. No sensational cases, nothing exciting, on the contrary. On the one hand, lots of red tape, because we're in the middle of overhauling the police judiciaire, and on the other, this spate of attacks on lone girls and women, sometimes involving rape. The press is making a hoo-ha, and I don't have enough men to set up the necessary patrols without decimating the department. Are you having problems with your digestion?" "Occasionally. Sometimes, like this evening, my stomach's in a knot. I have pain, or rather a sort of tightening of my chest and abdomen. I feel heavy, tired. Would you mind if I examined you?" His wife, in the next room, must have guessed. Madame Pardon, too, and that bothered Maigret. He had a horror of anything even remotely connected with illness. As he removed his tie, jacket, shirt, and vest, he recalled one of his adolescent notions. "I can't live," he'd announced at the time, "with pills, potions, a diet, reduced activity. I'd rather die than be an invalid." His idea of an invalid was someone who was forever listening to their heart, worrying about their stomach, their liver, or their kidneys, and exhibiting their naked body to the doctor on a regular basis. He no longer wished to die young, but he was putting off the time when he would become ill. "My trousers, too." "Drop them a little." Pardon took his blood pressure, examined him and felt his stomach and abdomen, pressing certain places with his fingers. "Does that hurt?" "No. Maybe a little tender. No, lower." Now he was like the others, anxious, ashamed of his fears and not daring to look his friend in the face. He got dressed again, awkwardly. Pardon's tone hadn't changed. "How long is it since you've had a holiday?" "Last year I managed to get away for a week, then I was called back because—" "What about the previous year?" "I stayed in Paris. With the life you lead, your organs should be in 5 times worse shape than they are." "My liver?" "It has nobly withstood the strain you put it under. It's slightly enlarged, for certain, but not hugely swollen, and it has maintained its elasticity." "What's wrong?" "Nothing specific. More or less everything. You're tired, that's a fact, and it's not a 1-week holiday that will rid you of that fatigue. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning?" "Crabby." That made Pardon laugh. "Do you sleep well?" "My wife says I'm restless, and that I sometimes talk in my sleep." "You're not filling your pipe?" "I'm trying to smoke less." "Why?" "I don't know. I'm also trying to drink less. Have a seat." Pardon sat down too, and at his desk looked more like a doctor than in the dining room or the living room. "Now listen to me. You're not ill, and you enjoy exceptional good health given your age and your occupation. So get that into your head once and for all. Stop worrying about the odd twinge and vague aches and pains, and don't start being nervous about climbing stairs. How do you know? And you, when you question a suspect, how do you know?" They both smiled. "Now we're in late June. Paris is sweltering. You are going to take a nice holiday without leaving an address, if possible. In any case, you must avoid telephoning Quai des Orfèvres every day." "I could do," said Maigret gruffly. "Our little house in Meung-sur-Loire." "You'll have time to enjoy that once you've retired. This year I have other plans for you. Do you know Vichy?" "I've never set foot there, even though I was born less than 50 kilometers away near Moulins. In those days, people didn't all have cars. By the way, does your wife have a driving license? We've even bought a 4CV. I think that a course of treatment at Vichy would do you the world of good, a thorough cleansing of your body." He nearly burst out laughing on seeing Maigret's expression. "Take the waters. A few glasses of water each day. I don't think the specialist will make you sit in mud baths or hot springs, or prescribe mechanotherapy and all that nonsense. You're not a serious case. 21 days of a regular lifestyle without any worries, or without beer, without wine, without eating out, without— How many years have you been indulging?" "I've had my share," he admitted. "And you'll have more, even if that share is slightly reduced. Is that agreed?" Maigret was amazed to hear himself say as he stood up like any other of Pardon's patients, "It's agreed." "When?" "In a few days' time, a week at most, once I've tied up all the loose ends. I'm going to refer you to one of my colleagues there, who's more knowledgeable about these things than I am. I know half a dozen specialists. Let's see. Ryan is still young and isn't at all pompous. I'll give you his address and telephone number. I'll write to him tomorrow to inform him." "Thank you, Pardon. That wasn't too painful, was it?" "You were very gentle." In the living room, he gave his wife a reassuring smile, but they didn't talk about illness at the Pardons. It was only when they reached Rue Popincourt, walking arm in arm, that Maigret muttered as if it was something unimportant. "We're spending our holiday in Vichy. Are you going to take the waters?" "May as well, while I'm there." He laughed. "I'm not ill. Apparently I'm in exceptionally good health. That's why I'm being sent to drink water." It didn't just date from that visit to Pardon. For some time he'd had the strange impression that everyone was younger than him, whether it was the prefect or the examining magistrates, defendants he was questioning, or now, this Dr. Ryan, who was fair-haired and affable and not yet 40. A kid, in other words, a young man at the most, nevertheless earnest and self-assured, who was going to decide his fate. This thought both annoyed and worried him, because he didn't feel like an old man, or even one who was aging. Despite his youthfulness, Dr. Ryan lived in a pretty pink brick residence on Boulevard des États-Unis, and, while the decor was reminiscent of the 1900s, it was still opulent-looking, with its marble staircases, carpets, polished furniture, and the maid in a frilly broderie anglaise cap. "I presume your parents are no longer living. What did your father die of?" The doctor wrote his replies down on an index card, painstakingly, in the calligraphic style characteristic of a sergeant major nib pen. "What about your mother? Do you have any brothers? Sisters? Childhood illnesses? Measles? Scarlet fever?" Not scarlet fever, but measles, very young, when his mother had still been alive. It was even the warmest, most comforting memory he had of her, because he was to lose her shortly afterwards. "What sports have you played? No accidents? Do you often get throat infections? Heavy smoker, I presume?" The young doctor smiled mischievously, to show Maigret that he knew him by reputation. One could say that you have led a sedentary life. It all depends. Sometimes I spend 3 weeks or a month in my office all day long, and then suddenly I'm out and about for several days. Regular meals? No. You don't follow a diet of any kind? Was he not obliged to admit that he loved slow-cooked dishes, stews and sauces of every imaginable flavour? Not just a food lover, but a big eater, eh? Quite big, yes. What about wine? Half a litre? A litre a day?